answer period. If you have a relevant question, post it. For those of you here in Costa Rica, the back of your name card or registration card has a QR code. We are using a system called Slido to get to the questions. Now a little bit more about Sanaa. She is a British Egyptian activist and filmmaker who has been campaigning to get her brother Alaa Abd El Fattah freed from prison in Egypt. She herself has been imprisoned in the past under the Sisi regime for her activism, most recently from the summer of 2020 until December 2021. And we spoke to her last year at RightsCon concerning the status of her brother, who has been in prison for the last 8 years or so, I believe. Right, Sanaa?
9 years now.
9 years. Sanaa, before we get going, I want to share the music video by the Egyptian pop star Rami Issam, who wrote a song about Alaa.
أمي كعكة حجرية ومحبة تخترق الزنازين، وأورثني أبي زنزانة وحلم لا تقيده أسوار السجن، ولا تحيط أطراف ميدان، ولا تحد حدود وطن.
Spent a full 5-year sentence, and that wasn't enough. He wasn't spared. The man who is personal about my family watched my father die while we were both in prison, me and my brother, and that wasn't enough.
لم أستلم ميراثي منهما بعد كاملا، فما زلت أنتظر أن أتعلم منهما كيف أقضي عمري في الميدان دون أن يأسر روحي ويستنزف حلمي، كيف أضل بداخلي وأنا قادر على مواجهة الكوابيس بداخلي، وما زلت أنتظر أن أتعلم منه كيف أخرج من السجن دون أن يبقى جزء مني في زنزانته، كيف أخرج وأسامح من ظلمني، كيف أخرج وأسامح من خذلني، كيف تحول من شوكة في ظهر الظلم، كيف تحول لسند لكل المظالم، كيف تحول من شوكة في ظهر الظلم، كيف تحول لسند لكل المظالم.
And I'm not just talking about my family. The generation of the Arab Spring has been stuck in paying the heavy price of this uprising. The price tag seems to be so high, it's endless. This is a generation that is tired, that is exhausted, that has languished, imprisoned, in morgues. Enough.
إلى أن أسلم ميراثي كاملا، سأعود كما كنت بلا يأس ولا أمل، بلا مد ولا حظ، أحلم ثورة لا يحدها ميدان، وأونس وحشة الزنزانة بمحبة لا يقيدها زجان. كيف تحول من شوكة في ظهر الظلم، كيف
Those are really powerful words in that music video. And I think for many people who haven't seen it for the first time, really intense. Sanaa, we had a very intense conversation 1 year ago at RightsCon. Brett Solomon was there with me. And we were talking because your brother was on hunger strike. Can you tell us where things stand today and what has happened in the past year?
Yeah. I just want to thank Romeo Song for making this song because it really sums up my family story. Ale is physically better now. He's in November he had a near-death experience. The prison authorities had to put him on drips, but afterwards he started eating willingly. The prison conditions have improved a lot, so attention helps, but we're still not very hopeful that he would be released. The reason why he felt like he wanted to live again and started eating willingly, he still wants to go back on hunger strike, but he's delaying this decision because my sister was pregnant. She had her baby a couple of days ago on the 1st.
Congratulations.
And so thank you. We just decided that we need to give each other a break from this drama. And it helps that the prison conditions have improved. So he has access to sunlight, he has music, he can watch TV, and he understands that this connection with the outside world wasn't given to him for charity. It is because of pressure, and he's really happy and thankful about that. So yeah, we have a breathing space. I'm also talking to you from Cairo, and I don't think I would have been able to do that without fearing arrest, take that calculated risk without the overwhelming solidarity that happened last November around the climate conference.
Yeah, I want to talk about pressure. So pressure seems to work a little. But last year, we were speaking ahead of Egypt hosting COP27. And there was certainly a lot of hope that with all eyes, the international community, all these international institutions, diplomats, activists in town, that they bring pressure to bear on releasing him, and they couldn't. What does that tell you about the international community and its limits? What does it tell you about the Egyptian government?
Generally, the question of limits exists. I mean, we all see Putin, and it makes me afraid for myself. So partly this is because of a lack of effectiveness from the international community, of course. But I really don't think governments pushed for my brother's release. What they pushed for, at least the US government, was basically what was said. I don't have it for sure, but what I sensed was that no one can afford for this man to die. Ale is a high-profile political prisoner. The regime decided to use him to set an example for others. So it's a tricky situation where his release will result in giving hope to many others. So it takes a lot of political will because it's a symbolic decision that has a wider meaning. And so it requires a lot of governments coming together. I don't think my other government, the British government, has really put leverage. And I don't think their allies, the Western allies, have really responded. They responded to solidarity and pressure by protecting me from imprisonment and by protecting Ale from death.
But that's pretty minimal,
But
right? Making sure someone doesn't die, as opposed to freeing him because he's done nothing wrong. So you talk about the British government.
It is minimal.
I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
tell us a little bit more. It seems like it's been a very frustrating point.
It has been. It has been 3 prime ministers, and the 3 prime ministers have publicly said they will take on the case. but no tangible steps were taken. The Egyptian Prime Minister was in London during the coronation, and I don't think even Allah was raised. I don't think they even paid lip service. There's a lot of trade deals between UK and Egypt. Even like we've been demanding them to change the travel advice because the British embassy has been denied consular access to Alep. So the least they can do is follow the US's lead in their travel advice and just be transparent with their citizens. Say that the British passport will not protect you from torture. You will not be getting consular access. It seems that it is obvious that governments are reluctant in calling out the human rights abuses and pressing robustly. And I think also partly it's because of there is a worry that Egypt will go and side with Russia. And this works a lot, this kind of
geopolitics,
with Russia,
right? Getting in the way of a very personal issue of yours.
It is an excuse, but I don't think it is really even in the. I don't think it from a geopolitical perspective, it is right to be bullied into accepting another way, an authoritarian ruler who is not acting like a reliable partner and be bullied into this and just pay a blind eye because it will backfire sooner or later.
So I'm curious what you think. Your brother is not the only one who is a British citizen or a U.S. citizen being held in another country. And there seems to be a pattern, actually, now, more and more of authoritarian regimes holding non-citizens, often activists, in prison, and their home country doesn't seem to have the leverage to be able to do much. You must think about this a lot. What needs to be done? If you were in charge, what do you think would be effective? What kind of hardball game do you have to play against these regimes?
Put the real interest, like tie the real interest with the human rights thing and the interests of your citizens. I'm not saying don't do trade, but condition this trade on the release of those citizens or the consular visit, or just really, governments are claiming that we need a close relationship to be able to address human rights, but this is another way of hiding that they just don't want to address human rights. So governments have a lot of tools. I'm not a politician, but I know that they have tools because I can see when they want something to happen, it happens. And I saw this with myself. Like I was in prison and I had consular visits immediately after my British passport was issued. Sometimes people are more likely to move for a girl, especially from a Western perspective, and also the Egyptian authorities are more likely to take you less seriously as a girl. But I saw how this leverage was used, and it was I don't know their tools, but I do know when they are fooling me and not using their tools.
Right. It's a very hard thing, and of course you say you're not a policy person in terms of exactly what economic tools can be done, but it's a frustrating point happening these days to many people around the world. I want to just double back a little bit. I failed to ask. Are you able to communicate with Allah these days? I mean, what kind of access do you have to him?
We are allowed to see him once a month for 20 minutes, but behind the glass shield. So I will visit him. I came back to Cairo to visit him on the 21st. That's problematic because Alaa's son is on the spectrum. He has autism and he's nonverbal, which means that he can't visit his father. He cannot communicate through a glass shield with phone speakers. So Ala has not seen his son for over 2 years now, but we see him every month. And every week we go to the prison, we hand over food and clothes, laundry, and we get a letter. So I get a weekly assurance that he's okay. I got a letter 2 days ago.
Do you think this will, how do you think, I mean, does it require that this regime ends before your brother has a chance in hell to get out?
Yeah, it is very tricky with my brother specifically because they decided to make him such an example. I don't think the regime needs to end. I think the regime needs to be forced into being a more reliable partner. And I don't think it's that very far-fetched. Unfortunately, because of the economic crisis in Egypt, there will be soon a necessity to force the regime to act more reliably. So I think the political will come. I don't think Alaa could be released to Egypt because of how they put all of us in this awkward position where they decided to make him the symbol. But he could easily be deported to Britain, and there is a law in Egypt that was issued actually for Jazeera journalists back in 2015, and there is precedent where they basically force you or push you to renounce your Egyptian citizenship, and then you get deported. I think this is the only practical way out for Alaa. I don't think they will let him live in Egypt, or this doesn't seem practical.
There are a lot of activists at RightsCon. I don't know if you've actually ever been here yourself, but this is a question for you and your brother, but what message would you have for those who, I mean, you guys are so irrepressible. You know, you continue to bring strength to the table to fight the good fight. How do you keep going? How do you hold on to hope as an activist? Any advice you have for people listening and tuning in with their own causes that they pursue and sometimes feel so frustrated when they're hitting the wall and not getting to where they want to go? Where do you find your strength?
I'm very pragmatic about my expectations, but I try to not have boundaries for my dreams. That's how I operate. I think this came from, because I am, I started political activism with January 25th, so I came from a movement that was defeated, so I have to be very pragmatic about my expectations. And I see value in the small things, because without building up on all of those small wins, you really have to remember how authoritarians and how the bad people in the world want the world to become. It's very misleading with the human rights situation in Egypt. We always have this discussion, like we feel like we don't do impact. But then when you remember the tens of thousands that they still want to put in prison, more in prison, and so the fact that you're pushing back repression is something in itself. If there is an advice, I would try to quote Alaa's words when he, back in 2021, Alaa had smuggled a speech to you guys for RightsCon.
Yes.
And he said, when people answering to the question of how can we help, he said, fix your own democracy. A setback for human rights in a place where democracy has deep roots is certain to be used as an excuse for even worse violations in societies where rights are more fragile. And don't play the game of nations. We risk much when human rights advocacy becomes a weapon in a Cold War. We reach out to you not in search of power for allies, but because we confront the same global problems and share universal values, and with a firm belief in the power of solidarity. And really, I think it's about solidarity. I wouldn't be able to endure the past 9 years without the overwhelming solidarity that I'm surrounded with in my country and abroad. In my country, it has to be very discreet, but we're always supported by people.
Someone actually clapped when you were talking about fixing your own democracy. I think that's something that resonates with me as well as a reporter. I've covered a lot on China, and of course, and quite critical of a lot of human rights violations. But people are always surprised when they ask me what my advice or policy advice would be in regards to dealing with China. And I always say, as an American, fix our own democracy. That's where you start. So I'm glad to hear that you have the same advice. People are very quiet and shy online. Let me see if there are any more questions. Lots of words of support. So if there are no other questions, I want to just ask a few more of my own. One is that other than trying to get your brother out, what are you working on these days as an activist? Any other causes and campaigns that you're involved in that you want to share with the community here?
To be honest, I have been overwhelmed with working on the political prisoners in Egypt. I've been looking at Sea-Watch in Germany. I really like their work. But since my release, I have only been released a year ago. I have barely managed to get back on my feet, do a little work, make living, and do the campaign.
Oh, that makes sense. It's just been a year. But for sure, you have to take care of yourself. Self-care is so important if you want to keep going. Sanaa, any final thoughts, and then we'll wrap.
No, just please stay aware. Being aware really matters, and follow the situation in Egypt and in the region, and check our website, because through our website you can write to your representatives through freeala.org. It makes a difference when I go knock on doors of politicians if they know that their constituents care. And continue to be active and do what you do beautifully, because if you fix your own democracy or you push there, it does change how the kind of relationships that exist between your government and ours do change.
Sanaa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you out there for watching. Those in Costa Rica, take a stretch out in the sun, and we'll see you back for later sessions.